I'm not sure when it started, when things shifted between us. Maybe it was gradual, like a hairline crack in a windshield that slowly spreads until one day, it shatters. I remember thinking we were perfect. We met in college, both of us fresh out of high school, naive about the world, but eager to carve out a life together. I don't think anyone thought we would last. Those young college romances never do, right? But we proved them wrong. We got married a few years later, settled into our first apartment, and everything seemed to fall into place. She was my person, my rock. Rachel. We weren't flashy, and we didn't have some kind of fairy tale romance. There were no grand gestures, no over-the-top proclamations of love. But what we had felt solid, like a foundation you could build a life on. We liked the same TV shows, laughed at the same stupid jokes, finished each other's sentences sometimes. That was us, simple, dependable, steady. I thought that was enough. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. In hindsight, I can see the signs. Small things that I brushed off because I trusted her. I trusted us. Like how she started going out with her friends more. At first, it was once in a while, which was fine. I was working late a lot, and she deserved to have some fun. But then it became more frequent. Every Friday night. Sometimes Saturday, too. I didn't think much of it at first. She'd come home a little later each time, but she always came home. And that smile, that damn smile, would erase any doubts that tried to creep in. But then came the night that everything changed. It's funny how one moment can flip your entire world upside down, and you don't even see it coming. I remember it vividly. It was a Friday, like any other. I'd just gotten home from work, tired but looking forward to our usual takeout and movie night. Except Rachel wasn't home. That wasn't unusual, though. She'd probably gone out for a drink with her friends again. I shot her a text. "What time you coming home?" It took her a while to reply, and when she did, it was short. "Late. Don't wait up." That's when the knot in my stomach started to form. Late? What did she mean by that? She never stayed out past midnight, maybe 1 o'clock at the latest. Something about her text felt off. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake that gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, turned on the TV, and tried to distract myself. But the hours ticked by, and she didn't come home. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock, still nothing. I sent her another text. "You good?" No reply. By 2 o'clock, I was pacing the living room, my mind racing. Where the hell was she? She'd never ignored my text before. My thoughts started spiraling, thinking of all the worst-case scenarios. Was she hurt? Was she in trouble? Or was it something else? Finally, at around 3:30 a.m., the front door creaked open, and she stumbled in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She was dressed in this short, tight black dress that I hadn't seen before. Her makeup was smudged, and her hair was a mess. She looked up at me, startled, as if she hadn't expected me to be awake. "You're up," she said, her voice slurred. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but the anger was seeping through. "With the girls," she said casually, like it was no big deal. "We went out for drinks." "Until 3:30 in the morning?" I snapped. "You didn't answer my texts." She frowned, pulling her phone out of her purse. "Oh, sorry. My phone died." Something about her demeanor, the way she swayed slightly, the way she avoided eye contact, sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I didn't believe her. Not for a second. But I didn't push it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face whatever truth was waiting for me in the shadows. She brushed past me, mumbling something about being tired and needing sleep, and disappeared into the bedroom. I stood there in the living room, staring after her, my heart pounding in my chest. Something wasn't right. I felt it in my bones. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She woke up late, lounged around in her pajamas, scrolling through her phone, sipping her coffee, like it was just another lazy Saturday. I watched her, trying to figure out if I was just being paranoid, or if there was something more going on. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she really had just been out with her friends. But that knot in my stomach hadn't gone away. I didn't say anything that day. I didn't confront her. I wanted to believe that I was imagining things, that this was all in my head. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. She started going out more frequently. Her phone was always glued to her hand, and she was more secretive about it than ever. When I'd ask who she was texting, she'd shrug it off. Just work stuff, she'd say. But there were too many messages for it to just be work. Then came the first real red flag. It was a Wednesday night, and I'd just gotten home from work. Rachel was in the shower, and her phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, buzzing with notifications. I didn't mean to look. I'm not the kind of guy who snoops. But the screen lit up, and a message caught my eye. "Can't wait to see you again, winky face." My blood ran cold. My first instinct was to grab her phone, unlock it, and see who the hell was sending her flirty messages. But I didn't. I didn't want to be that guy. The guy who snoops through his wife's phone because he doesn't trust her. So I waited. When she got out of the shower, I casually asked, "Who was texting you?" She glanced at her phone, swiped it off the counter, and shrugged. "Oh, just Sarah. We're planning a girls' night out this weekend." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but my mind was racing. Sarah? The same Sarah who had gotten engaged last month and was in the midst of wedding planning? The same Sarah who barely had time for a coffee, let alone a wild night out? That was the moment when I knew something was seriously wrong. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I started paying closer attention. I watched her more carefully, noticing the little things I had ignored before. The way she always had her phone face down when she put it on the table, the way she would disappear into another room to take calls, the way she was always too tired when it came to us being intimate. One night, while she was in the shower again, I couldn't help myself. I grabbed her phone and scrolled through her messages. And that's when I found it, the proof I had been dreading. There were dozens of messages from a guy named E. Some were innocent enough. Small talk, jokes, memes. But then there were the ones that shattered me. Flirty comments, suggestive photos, plans to meet up. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My head was spinning. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I felt sick. My hands were shaking as I read the messages, each one worse than the last. She had been lying to me for months. Months. While I was working late, she was out with him. While I was at home, waiting for her to come back, she was with him. My stomach churned, and I had to put the phone down before I threw it across the room. When she came out of the bathroom, I tried to act normal, but I couldn't look her in the eye. My mind was reeling, and I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her? Should I wait? What if I was wrong? What if it wasn't what it looked like? But deep down, I knew. The next few days were torture. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every time I looked at her, all I could think about were those messages. I wanted to scream, to yell at her, to demand answers. But I stayed quiet. I didn't want to believe that the woman I had loved for so long, the woman I had built a life with, could do this to me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. One night, while we were sitting on the couch, watching TV, I turned to her and said, "Rachel, is there something you need to tell me?" She looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" I said, my voice shaking. "Is there something going on that I should know about?" Her expression changed in an instant. Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms. "What are you talking about?" "I've seen your messages," I said, my heart pounding. "I know about E." Her face went pale, but she quickly recovered, rolling her eyes and laughing. "Oh my God, Jason, you're being ridiculous. E is just a friend. We've been talking, but it's nothing serious." "Nothing serious?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You've been sending him pictures, Rachel. You've been meeting up with him. How is that nothing serious?" She glared at me, her voice cold and defensive. "You're overreacting. We haven't done anything. He's just someone I talk to when you're not around." I stared at her in disbelief. How could she lie to my face like this? How could she make it seem like I was the one being unreasonable? I couldn't believe how calm she was, as if the weight of what I just said hadn't sunk in, or worse, as if she didn't care. There was a pit in my stomach, and my voice cracked as I said, "Rachel, I'm not stupid. I saw the messages. It's not just talking. It's not just harmless flirting. You've been sneaking around behind my back." She rolled her eyes again, like I was being dramatic. "You're blowing this way out of proportion, Jason. I haven't slept with him, if that's what you're thinking." I can't believe you'd even accuse me of something like that. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? That question echoed in my head as she turned it around on me, making me feel like I was the one in the wrong. My hands were shaking now, and I could feel the frustration building inside me, threatening to spill over into something I couldn't control. Don't turn this around on me, I said, my voice barely steady. This isn't about me being paranoid or overreacting. It's about you lying. You're hiding things, sneaking around, and now you're gaslighting me, trying to make it seem like I'm imagining all of this. She threw her hands up in exasperation. Gaslighting? Seriously, Jason? I'm not gaslighting you. You're the one who's making a big deal out of nothing. God, I can't even talk to a guy without you getting all possessive. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't the woman I had married. Or maybe she was, and I was just seeing it now for the first time. It felt like everything was unraveling in front of me, and I didn't know how to stop it. I wanted to scream, to demand that she stop pretending like this wasn't happening, but I was so tired. I had spent days wrestling with my suspicions, battling with my gut, and now I was here, watching her brush it all off as if I was some crazy, jealous husband. I stood up, pacing the living room, running my hands through my hair. Rachel, you've been lying to me. For months. I trusted you. I believed you. And now, all I'm asking for is the truth. Just tell me the truth. For a moment, just a brief moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? I wasn't sure. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. Her face hardened again, and she shook her head, letting out a frustrated sigh. I already told you the truth. There's nothing going on. I can't help it if you don't believe me. I couldn't take it anymore. Rachel, I saw the messages. I saw the way you talked to him, the way you plan to meet up with him. You can't stand there and tell me nothing's happening. I deserve better than that. She stood up, crossing her arms tightly across her chest, glaring at me with an intensity one had never seen before. You deserve better? Maybe if you were actually around, I wouldn't need to talk to someone else. Maybe if you paid attention to me once in a while, I wouldn't have to go out and have fun without you. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. Are you serious? I work my ass off to provide for us. I'm always here, trying to make things work. You're the one who's checked out. You're the one who's been lying. Don't you dare put this on me. The argument spiraled from there, escalating into a screaming match that left both of us raw and drained. She kept accusing me of being distant, of not caring about her needs, of being paranoid and controlling. I kept pushing her, demanding to know why she was lying, why she was turning this into my fault. Eventually, she stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, staring at the closed door, my chest heaving with anger, frustration, and disbelief. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I loved turned into someone who could lie to my face and then blame me for it? I felt like I was losing my mind. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing, replaying every conversation, every text, every glance that had passed between us over the last few months. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, and the picture they formed was a nightmare. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew the truth. She was cheating on me. Maybe she hadn't admitted it. Maybe she hadn't even slept with him yet, but emotionally, she was already gone. The next few days were a blur. Rachel didn't come home until late the following night, and when she did, she acted like nothing had happened. She didn't apologize, didn't try to explain. It was like she had made her choice, and now she was just waiting for me to make mine. I tried to act normal, but the tension between us was unbearable. We barely spoke. When we did, it was cold, clipped conversations about mundane things. Bills, groceries, the dog. There was no warmth, no connection. It was like we were strangers living under the same roof. Then, one night, I made another discovery. She had left her laptop open on the dining room table, and when I walked by, I saw an email notification pop up. It was from him. The subject line simply said, "Last night?" My stomach dropped. I clicked on the email, my hands trembling as I read the words on the screen. It was a short message, but it was enough to confirm everything I had feared. He talked about their night together, how amazing it was, how he couldn't wait to see her again. He even mentioned the hotel where they had stayed. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I sank into the chair, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was the proof I needed. She had been lying to me all along. She hadn't just been talking to him. She had been sleeping with him. I couldn't breathe. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to process what I had just read. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart, not mine. How could she do this to me? How could she betray me like this? Eventually, I stood up, walked into the bedroom, and confronted her. She was sitting on the bed, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice low, trembling with anger. She looked up at me, her expression blank. "What are you talking about?" "I saw the email," I said, my voice rising. "I know you've been sleeping with him. Don't lie to me anymore, Rachel." "I know." Her face paled, and for a moment, she looked like she might deny it again. But then something shifted in her eyes and she sighed, setting her phone down on the bed. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. "Yes, I've been seeing him. Are you happy now? You got what you wanted." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had expected her to deny it, to keep lying, to keep up the act. But now, hearing her admit it so casually, like it was no big deal, like it didn't even matter, it broke something inside me. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Does it matter?" she shot back. "It's not like we were happy anyway." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had been fighting for us, for our marriage, while she had been sneaking around behind my back. And now she was acting like it didn't even matter, like it was just some inevitable conclusion to a relationship she had already given up on. I felt the anger rising in me, hotter and more intense than anything I had ever felt before. "How could you do this to me?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. "How could you lie to me, cheat on me, and then act like it's my fault?" She stood up, crossing her arms over her chest, her face hard and defiant. "You want to know why I did it, Jason? Because you don't see me anymore. You don't pay attention. All you care about is work and your own damn life. I needed something more, something exciting, and you weren't giving it to me." I stared at her, stunned. How had this become my fault? How had she twisted this around to make it seem like I was the one to blame for her infidelity? "So what?" I asked, my voice bitter. "You decided to go and find excitement with someone else? That's your solution? To cheat?" She shrugged, her expression cold and detached. "I needed to feel alive, and you weren't giving me that anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a choice, a deliberate, calculated decision to betray me. And now, she was standing here, unapologetic, blaming me for her actions. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm done." She looked at me, her face expressionless. "Fine, if that's what you want." It was the coldest, most indifferent response she could have given, and it shattered whatever was left of my heart. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay. Not in that house. Not with her. As I drove away, the reality of what had happened started to sink in. My marriage was over. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with everything, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And now, I was alone. For the next few weeks, I stayed with a friend, trying to piece together my shattered life. I avoided Rachel's calls, her texts, her attempts to reach out and talk. There was nothing left to say. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. Eventually, I filed for divorce. It was a painful, messy process, but it was the only way to move forward, the only way to start healing. Looking back now, I realized that the signs were there all along. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the emotional distance. It had all been leading up to this. But I had ignored it, because I didn't want to believe that the woman I loved could be capable of something like this. Now, months later, I'm still picking up the pieces. Some days are better than others. Some days, I feel like I'm making progress, like I'm moving on. Other days, the pain is still fresh, still raw. But I'm getting there. One thing I know for sure, I'll never let someone make me feel like that again. I'll never let someone take my trust, my love, and use it against me. I've learned that healing takes time. It's not a straight path, and it's not easy. But every day, I'm a little bit stronger. And one day, I'll be whole again. The weeks following the final confrontation with Rachel were a blur of numbness and anger. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. Just a temporary place, I told myself, somewhere to clear my head. The apartment was cold, lifeless, and impersonal, but at least it didn't hold any memories. Unlike the house we shared, this place had no ghosts of our past together. It didn't remind me of how happy I thought we once were, of the mornings we spent laughing over coffee, or the nights when I believed our marriage was still something worth fighting for. I tried to stay busy, to avoid the silence that filled the apartment when I was alone. Work became my refuge. I buried myself in it, taking on extra projects, staying late at the office, just so I wouldn't have to come home to an empty space. But even work couldn't completely distract me from the ache in my chest that refused to go away. Everywhere I went, it seemed like couples were around me, holding hands, laughing, doing all the things Rachel and I used to do. I couldn't escape the constant reminder of what I'd lost. One night, after a particularly long day, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. I didn't know why I did it. Maybe some part of me was hoping to find a moment where things had been better, some evidence that it wasn't all a lie. But as I looked through picture after picture of Rachel and me, I couldn't help but wonder when it had all started to go wrong. Was there a specific moment? Or had it been falling apart for longer than I realized? I stared at a photo from our last vacation together. We'd gone to the coast for a weekend getaway, something to reconnect, I'd thought. In the picture, we're smiling, arms around each other, the sun setting behind us. We looked happy. I looked happy. But now, as I stared at it, I wondered if that smile had been real or if it had been as fake as everything else in our marriage. It was around that time that the messages from Rachel began again. At first, they were short, simple, almost casual. Hey, can we talk? Or, I miss you. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses, her justifications, or her apologies, if she even had any. What was there to say? She destroyed everything, and no amount of talking would ever fix it. But Rachel wasn't the type to give up easily. She kept reaching out, and eventually, her messages became more desperate. I'm sorry, Jason. Please, let's talk. I need to explain. We can fix this. It was that last message that broke something inside me. We can fix this. As if it was something so simple, as if a few conversations and a couple of apologies would erase what she had done. Fix it? How do you fix betrayal? How do you fix the wreckage of a life you thought was solid? I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at the absurdity of it all. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. Maybe it was a part of me that still wanted closure. Maybe I just wanted to see if she had any remorse left in her. So, we met at a small coffee shop, neutral territory, somewhere that wasn't tied to any of our memories. I didn't want to be reminded of us, of what we used to be. I wanted this conversation to be as detached and emotionless as possible. When I walked in, she was already sitting at a corner table, her hands nervously wrapped around a cup of coffee. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, our eyes met. It was strange, seeing her there, after everything that had happened, after everything I'd discovered. She looked different, or maybe it was me who had changed. I didn't feel the same connection I once had. The woman sitting there wasn't the Rachel I had fallen in love with. She was someone else, someone I barely recognized. Jason, she said softly when I sat down. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. I'm glad you came, she continued, her voice shaky. I've been thinking about us a lot, about everything that happened. And I know I hurt you. I clenched my jaw, my hands resting on the table, fingers tapping nervously against the wood. I didn't want to make this easy for her. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done. I don't think you understand how badly you hurt me, Rachel, I said finally, my voice cold. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything. She flinched at my words, her eyes filling with tears. I know I did. And I'm so sorry, Jason. I was confused. I wasn't thinking straight. But I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted things to end like this. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me again, but I tried to keep my voice steady. You didn't just hurt me, Rachel. You lied. You cheated. You made me feel like I was losing my mind while you were sneaking around behind my back. Do you even realize what you've done? She wiped at her eyes, her hands trembling. It wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't plan it. It just did. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. That's bullshit, and you know it. You don't just accidentally cheat on someone. You made a choice. She looked away, her shoulders slumping as she let out a shaky breath. I know I did. And I regret it. Every single day, I regret it. I wish I could take it all back. The anger I'd been holding back finally boiled over. You regret it now? Now, after everything's fallen apart? Where was that regret when you were meeting him in hotel rooms? Where was that regret when you were lying to my face, making me feel like I was crazy for even questioning you? You didn't regret it then. Her face crumpled as she sobbed quietly into her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy for her. Not anymore. I'd spent too long drowning in my own pain, and I was done feeling sorry for her. I'm sorry, Jason, she whispered again. I know I can't fix what I've done, but I want us to at least talk about it. I want to understand how we got here. I stared at her for a long moment, my mind swirling with everything I wanted to say, everything I wanted to scream. But I was tired. So damn tired of reliving the same pain over and over again. You want to understand? I said quietly. We got here because you didn't care enough to stop. You didn't care enough about us, about me, to stop yourself before it went too far. You made a choice, Rachel, and now we're both paying for it. She nodded, sniffling as she wiped her eyes. I know you're right. I don't know what to do now. For the first time since the confrontation, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. This was it. The end. There was no going back from this. There's nothing left to do, I said, standing up. It's over. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw panic flash across her face. Jason, please. No, I cut her off, my voice firm. We're done. I can't do this anymore. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her sitting there, crying into her cup. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the kind of relief that comes from closure. It wasn't that simple, but it was the relief that comes from knowing that I had finally made the decision to let go, to stop holding on to something that was already broken beyond repair. The months that followed were hard. Moving on was never going to be easy, not after everything that had happened. There were days when the pain felt fresh again, when I'd wake up and for a brief moment forget that my life had been turned upside down. And then there were days when I'd feel okay, like I was finally starting to put the pieces of myself back together. I started going to therapy, something I'd never thought I'd need. But talking to someone who wasn't involved in the mess, helped more than I expected. It gave me a place to process everything, to sort through the wreckage of my emotions without feeling like I was drowning in them. One thing became clear during those sessions. Rachel's betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about the lies, the manipulation, the way she made me question my own reality. She had gaslighted me, twisted things around to make me doubt myself, and that kind of betrayal was harder to heal from than I'd imagined. It wasn't just my trust in her that had been shattered. It was my trust in myself. I learned that healing wasn't a straight path. Some days, I felt like I was making progress, like I was finally starting to move on. Other days, I'd be hit by waves of grief, anger, and confusion that knocked me off balance. But I kept going, kept pushing forward, because I knew there was no other way out of this darkness except through it. Eventually, I started to rebuild. Slowly, piece by piece, I began to put my life back together. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I had neglected during my marriage, and started focusing on myself for the first time in years. And then, one day, I woke up and realized that I didn't think about Rachel every day anymore. The ache in my chest had dulled, and while the scars were still there, they didn't hurt as much as they once did. I was healing, slowly but surely. Looking back now, I realized that the hardest part of the whole ordeal wasn't losing Rachel. It was losing the version of myself that had trusted so blindly, loved so deeply, and believed so completely in something that wasn't real. But I've learned that trust can be rebuilt, love can be found again, and life goes on, even after the darkest of days. I'm not the same person I was before all of this happened, and maybe that's a good thing. I've grown, I've learned, and I've become stronger in ways I never imagined. There's still a long road ahead of me, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful about the future. And that's something I never thought I'd say. As I moved further from the wreckage of my old life, things began to shift. The pain that had once been constant, like a dull ache that refused to fade, started to ebb away slowly. It wasn't that I woke up one morning and everything was fine. No, it was more like a slow, gradual release, a loosening of the grip that grief had on me. One day, I realized I hadn't checked Rachel's social media in weeks. Another, I noticed I didn't instinctively wince when I heard her name mentioned. It was like parts of me were slowly coming back to life. The healing wasn't linear, though. There were setbacks, moments where the weight of it all came crashing back down on me. I'd see a couple laughing at a cafe, or I'd pass by the restaurant where Rachel and I used to go for date nights, and all the progress I thought I'd made would crumble. But those moments didn't last as long as they used to. The sadness didn't linger like it once did, and I learned to recognize that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding a way to live with the scars. It took months before I even considered dating again. The idea of letting someone new into my life felt foreign, like a concept that didn't apply to me anymore. How could I trust anyone again? How could I open myself up, knowing how easily it could all be torn apart? But my therapist encouraged me to think about it, not as a way to move on from Rachel, but as a way to reconnect with myself. To remind myself that life hadn't stopped just because my marriage had ended. At first, I resisted. It felt too soon, too raw. But as time passed, I started to see the wisdom in her words. I couldn't let Rachel's betrayal define me forever. So, I dipped my toes into the dating pool again, cautiously at first. I downloaded a couple of apps, swiped through profiles, and even went on a few dates. Most of them were awkward, full of forced conversation and polite laughter. I'd sit across from a woman at a bar or a cafe, and all I could think about was how different it felt, how much work it was just to have a conversation, when with Rachel, things had once flowed so easily. But that's the thing about heartbreak. It warps your memory. It makes you forget that even the relationships you once thought were perfect had their rough edges. It makes you idealize the past, even when the reality was far from ideal. Eventually, I met someone who didn't make me feel like I was constantly walking on eggshells. Her name was Emily, and she was kind, funny, and refreshingly honest. There was no pretense with her, no games or manipulation. She wasn't Rachel, and that was exactly what I needed. We took things slow. I was honest with her from the start about what I'd been through, about the trust issues I was still working through, and she respected that. She didn't push me to open up before I was ready, but she also didn't shy away from asking me tough questions when the time was right. It was a delicate balance, one I hadn't realized I needed. With Emily, I started to rediscover parts of myself that I had forgotten. I laughed more. I let myself have fun without the constant worry of betrayal lurking in the background. We'd go on weekend hikes, cook dinner together, or just spend quiet evenings watching movies. It was simple, but it was real, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Of course, there were moments of doubt. There were times when I'd find myself questioning her every move, wondering if she was hiding something from me the way Rachel had. It wasn't fair to Emily, and I knew that, but it was like my brain had been rewired to expect the worst. Trust, I realized, was a muscle that had to be rebuilt, one that had atrophied during the years of lies and betrayal. Emily was patient with me, though. She didn't take my moments of doubt personally, and over time, I found myself letting go of the need to control every little thing. I didn't check her phone, didn't grill her about her whereabouts when she wasn't with me. I let myself trust her, slowly but surely, and in doing so, I started to trust myself again. The funny thing about healing is that it sneaks up on you. One day, you're convinced you'll never get over the pain, and then suddenly, you realize you haven't thought about it in days. It's not that the scars disappear, they don't, but they fade, becoming less of a reminder of what was lost and more of a testament to what you survived. Rachel, in the end, became a memory. We finalized our divorce without much drama. She didn't fight me on anything, didn't try to win me back. Maybe she'd moved on, too. I didn't ask. I didn't care. The person I had once loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, and I had no interest in looking back. For a while, I wondered if I'd ever stop comparing everyone to her. If I'd ever be able to fully open myself up to someone new without the shadow of my past hanging over me. But with Emily, I learned that love can look different, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be the same as it was before. In fact, it shouldn't be. Emily wasn't Rachel, and our relationship wasn't some carbon copy of my marriage. It was something entirely new, something we built together, brick by brick. And while I still had my moments of insecurity, they didn't define our relationship. We had something real, something grounded in mutual respect and trust, and that was more than I had ever imagined finding again. As time went on, I found myself thinking about Rachel less and less. The anger I had felt toward her, the resentment, the bitterness, it all started to fade. Not because I forgave her, exactly, but because I realized that holding on to that anger was only hurting me. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how I let it affect my future. One day, months after our divorce was finalized, I ran into Rachel at the grocery store. It was unexpected, and for a moment, I felt that familiar pang of anxiety, the same feeling I used to get when I wondered where she was or who she was with. But then it passed, and I realized that she no longer had any power over me. We exchanged awkward pleasantries, talking about nothing in particular. She looked different, tired, maybe, or just older than I remembered. I didn't feel the anger I thought I would. In fact, I didn't feel much of anything at all. She was just a person I used to know, someone who had played a part in my life but no longer had a place in it. As we said our goodbyes and went our separate ways, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I needed. It wasn't a grand moment of catharsis, but it was enough. I had moved on. I had rebuilt myself from the ashes of our marriage, and I was stronger for it. The road to healing had been long and painful, but it had also taught me more about myself than I ever thought possible. I learned that I was resilient, that I could survive the worst kind of betrayal and still come out the other side. I learned that love, when it's real and true, doesn't break you. It builds you up. And I learned that while trust can be shattered, it can also be rebuilt, slowly, piece by piece. Emily and I continued to build our life together, and while I knew that no relationship was perfect, I also knew that we were committed to each other in a way that felt solid, unshakable. We communicated, we laughed, we supported each other through the hard times, and most importantly, we trusted each other. Looking back now, I can see that what happened with Rachel, as devastating as it was, didn't define me. It was a chapter in my life, a painful one, but just a chapter. The rest of my story was still being written, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would lead. The scars of betrayal would always be there, faint reminders of a time when I lost my way. But they didn't hurt anymore. They were just part of the fabric of who I was, and they didn't control me. I had taken back my life, my heart, and my trust, and I was ready to move forward, into a future that was mine to create. The day I ran into Rachel at the grocery store, something in me shifted permanently. I didn't know it at the time, but that brief, mundane encounter marked the true end of a chapter one had been struggling to close for months. As I walked out of the store, pushing my cart through the parking lot, I realized that I wasn't carrying the same weight anymore. The anger, the resentment, even the hurt, while still present, had dulled to the point of almost non-existence. I wasn't free from the pain overnight, but I was finally detached enough from it to see things clearly. The clarity didn't come in some profound revelation or grand epiphany. It came in small, quiet moments, like the one I had just experienced. I had spoken to Rachel and felt nothing. For weeks afterward, I would reflect on that. She was a part of my life, but she wasn't a part of my present, and that distinction was the key to my healing. I thought about how for so long I had let the betrayal define me, shape me, and dictate how I moved through the world. But now I saw Rachel for who she really was. Just another person who made a mistake, someone who had lost her way, too. I no longer needed to hang on to the bitterness because, truthfully, it wasn't helping me anymore. Emily noticed the change in me, too. We hadn't been dating long enough for her to witness the worst of my spiral, but she'd seen enough to know I had been struggling with trust. I hadn't opened up about every dark moment, every sleepless night filled with questions I could never ask Rachel. But I had been honest with her about the cheating, about the way Rachel had systematically dismantled the trust in our marriage, and about how it had taken so much from me. One evening, Emily and I were having dinner at a small, cozy restaurant near my new apartment. The night was crisp, the air filled with the first hints of autumn, and the warm glow of the lights from inside the restaurant made everything feel just a little softer, a little easier. "You seem different lately," Emily said, her eyes flickering with curiosity as she sipped her wine. I smiled, setting my fork down and looking at her. "Different how?" "Lighter," she said, tilting her head as if she were studying me. "Like you're not carrying as much." "I don't know. It's a good thing. I like it." She was right, though. I had been feeling lighter. And though I didn't want to make too much of the moment in the grocery store, it had been a turning point. "I think I'm finally letting go," I admitted, leaning back in my chair. "Of everything with Rachel. The anger, the hurt, all of it. I think I'm finally ready to move on." Emily reached across the table and took my hand. Her touch was soft, reassuring. "I know that wasn't easy for you. It's been a long road." I squeezed her hand gently, grateful for her understanding. "It has. But I'm not going to let what happened with her define the rest of my life. I don't want to carry that baggage into anything new, especially not into this." Emily smiled at me, her eyes warm. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, Jason. You deserve to feel whole again." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over me that I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about me, about reclaiming my life and letting myself believe in the possibility of happiness again. Our relationship deepened over the following months, and with Emily, things felt different from the start. It was quieter, in a way. There were no grand, sweeping gestures or wild, passionate declarations. But there was trust, mutual respect, and, most importantly, there was honesty. We communicated openly, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing in my marriage with Rachel until it was too late. Emily never gave me a reason to doubt her, and I made a conscious effort not to project my old wounds onto her. There were still moments of insecurity, of course, times when I'd catch myself wondering if she was hiding something, or if I was missing signs like I had with Rachel. But when those thoughts surfaced, I confronted them head-on, and Emily was always patient with me. I knew, deep down, that those lingering fears weren't about her. They were about the scars I carried from the past. One night, as we lay in bed, the sound of rain pattering against the window, I found myself thinking about trust again. I had come so far in rebuilding it, not just with Emily, but with myself. I no longer doubted every decision I made or questioned whether I was worthy of love. I wasn't constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't haunted by Rachel's betrayal the way I once had been. "Do you ever think about her?" Emily asked softly, as if reading my mind. I turned to look at her, surprised by the question. "Rachel?" She nodded, her face serene in the soft light of the lamp. "I know it's not easy to completely move on from something like that." I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. "Not really, no. I mean, sometimes, I guess, but not in the way I used to. It doesn't hurt anymore, if that's what you're asking." Emily smiled and reached for my hand, intertwining her fingers with mine. "I'm glad." "So am I," I said quietly. It was in moments like that, in the quiet, unremarkable exchanges, that I realized how far I had come. Rachel was part of my story, but she wasn't the whole story. I had been through the fire, yes, but I had come out on the other side, stronger and more self-aware than I had ever been. And for that, I was grateful. As the years went by, my life with Emily unfolded in ways I hadn't anticipated. We built something together, a life filled with trust, laughter, and shared experiences. We moved in together after a year, and while I was hesitant at first, afraid of repeating the same mistakes, it felt right. There were no nagging doubts or hidden fears. I had learned how to communicate my insecurities, and Emily always met them with understanding and patience. One day, after we had been living together for a while, I found myself sitting on the couch, holding a small, velvet box in my hand. I had bought it weeks ago, agonizing over the decision to propose. Not because I didn't want to marry Emily. I did, with every fiber of my being. But because I still carried the weight of my first marriage, and the thought of entering into another one brought up all sorts of old fears. What if I wasn't good enough? What if I failed again? What if, despite everything, trust could never be fully rebuilt? But then I thought about Emily, about how she had been there for me through all of it, how she had stood by me, not just as a partner, but as a friend, as someone who believed in me even when I doubted myself. She wasn't Rachel, and I wasn't the man I had been when I married Rachel. This was different. I smiled to myself, knowing that while the fear might always be there, it didn't have to control me. I had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and moving forward in spite of it. So, one evening, as the sun set over the city, casting a warm, golden glow through the windows, I got down on one knee and asked Emily to marry me. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I was scared. Scared that she might say no, scared that I had misjudged everything. But then she smiled, that beautiful, genuine smile that had pulled me in from the very start, and she said, yes, 1,000 times yes. And just like that, I knew I had found my second chance, not just at love, but at life. We got married a year later in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by our closest friends and family. It wasn't flashy or extravagant, but it was perfect. We exchanged vows that were filled with honesty, promises to always communicate, to never take each other for granted, and to face whatever challenges came our way together. As we stood there, hand in hand, looking into each other's eyes, I felt a peace that I hadn't known was possible. I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore, waiting for the past to catch up with me. I wasn't afraid of what might go wrong. Instead, I was focused on the present, on the love we had built and the life we were creating together. Rachel was a distant memory now, and while I would never forget what happened between us, I no longer let it define me. It had taken time, patience, and a lot of hard work, but I had rebuilt myself, piece by piece. I had learned how to trust again, not just in others, but in myself. And as Emily and I walked down the aisle, surrounded by people who loved and supported us, I knew, without a doubt, that this was where I was meant to be. This was the life I was meant to live. The scars were still there, faint reminders of the past, but they didn't hurt anymore. They were part of my story, but they didn't control me. I had moved on, I had healed, and I had found love again. Real, honest, unshakable love. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Life with Emily was different in all the best ways. It wasn't perfect. We had our disagreements, our misunderstandings, but we always worked through them, never letting things fester the way they had in my first marriage. We learned how to communicate effectively, and more importantly, we valued each other's perspectives. That was something I hadn't realized I was missing with Rachel. The feeling that I was seen, that my thoughts, feelings, and fears were taken seriously. Emily wasn't just my partner. She was my teammate. We worked together to build something real, something solid. It wasn't built on the illusion of perfection or the naive belief that love alone was enough to make everything work. No, what we had was messy and flawed at times, but it was honest. And that honesty became the cornerstone of our relationship. After the wedding, we settled into a rhythm that felt comfortable. We found a house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where kids played in the streets and neighbors actually waved hello. It was the opposite of the life I had once imagined for myself, back when I thought success meant living in a high-rise apartment and constantly chasing after the next big thing. But I didn't want that life anymore. I had realized, through everything that had happened, that what I truly craved was stability, peace, and a sense of home. Emily and I talked about starting a family, and while the idea excited me, it also terrified me. I'd never really thought about having kids before, not seriously. Rachel and I had discussed it once or twice in the early years of our marriage, but it always felt like some distant possibility, something we would get to eventually. Of course, we never did. But with Emily, It felt different. I could see it, us, with kids, building a life that was full of love, laughter, and the occasional chaos that comes with raising children. The idea of being a father was daunting, especially considering everything I'd been through, but I also felt ready for it. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the future. One evening, after we had been married for about a year, Emily and I were sitting on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. It was one of those quiet moments that we had come to cherish. Just the two of us, no distractions, no noise. I had grilled steaks for dinner, and we were sipping wine, talking about our day. "I've been thinking," Emily said, her voice soft as she rested her head on my shoulder. "About what?" I asked, running my fingers through her hair absent-mindedly. "About the future. About kids." I glanced at her, feeling a familiar mix of excitement and nervousness settle in my chest. "Yeah? What about them?" She smiled, her eyes twinkling in the fading light. "I think I'm ready. If you are, of course. I know we've talked about it, but I think I'm ready to start trying." For a moment, I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't want it, I did, but because the weight of what she was saying hit me in a way I hadn't expected. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change, where our lives would shift into something new, something bigger. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. "I'm more than ready." Emily smiled, and in that moment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It was different from the peace I had found when I moved on from Rachel. This was a deeper peace, one rooted in the knowledge that I was building something good, something real. Over the next few months, we started trying to get pregnant. It wasn't an easy process. There were ups and downs, moments of hope followed by moments of disappointment. But through it all, we leaned on each other, never letting the setbacks shake our resolve. I knew that, no matter what happened, Emily and I would get through it together. That was what made our relationship so different from the one I had with Rachel. There were no secrets, no hidden agendas. We faced everything head-on, as a team. And then, one day, it happened. Emily came home from work, her face pale, her hands shaking as she held up a small, white stick. At first, I didn't understand what she was trying to show me, but then I saw it. The two faint pink lines. "Are you serious?" I asked, my heart racing as I looked from the pregnancy test to her face. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm pregnant, Jason. We're going to have a baby." I felt like the world stopped for a moment. Everything I had ever been through, the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it all led me to this, to her, to us, standing in the middle of our kitchen, holding each other as we cried tears of joy. The months that followed were a whirlwind of preparations, doctor's appointments, and endless discussions about baby names, nursery colors, and parenting philosophies. We found out we were having a girl, and I couldn't have been more thrilled. I was going to be a father. Me. After everything that had happened, after all the ways I had doubted myself and my ability to trust again, I was going to be a dad. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly, deeply ready for what was coming. The day our daughter was born was the most terrifying and exhilarating experience of my life. Emily went into labor in the middle of the night, and we rushed to the hospital, both of us a mix of nerves and excitement. I held her hand through every contraction, whispering words of encouragement as she pushed through the pain. I'd never seen anyone so strong, so determined. When our daughter finally entered the world, crying and pink and perfect, something inside me shifted. It was as if my heart had expanded to make room for a love I had never known was possible. I held her in my arms, her tiny body wrapped in a blanket, and I knew that this was what I had been waiting for all along. This was the life I had been meant to build. We named her Grace, and she became the center of our world. Those early days were exhausting and chaotic, filled with sleepless nights and constant diaper changes, but they were also the most beautiful days of my life. Emily and I worked as a team, trading off feedings and taking turns soothing Grace when she cried. There were moments when we were so tired that we could barely keep our eyes open, but we never stopped loving each other, never stopped appreciating what we had built. Watching Emily with Grace was one of the greatest joys of my life. She was a natural mother, patient, kind, and endlessly loving. I had always known she would be an incredible mom, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. She brought out the best in me, too. Being a father wasn't easy, but it was the most rewarding thing I had ever done. Every time Grace smiled at me, or reached out her tiny hand to grab my finger, I felt a surge of love so powerful it took my breath away. As Grace grew, so did our family. Emily and I had another child, a boy we named Owen, and our little family of 4 became the center of my world. The house was always filled with noise, laughter, crying, the pitter-patter of little feet running through the halls. It was messy and chaotic, but it was perfect. Through it all, I never forgot what I had been through with Rachel. The betrayal, the lies, the heartache. It was all still there, buried deep in my past. But it no longer had the power to hurt me. I had moved on, built a life that was full of love and trust, and I was proud of the man I had become. There were still moments when the old scars would ache, when I'd think about how different my life could have been if I had stayed with Rachel. But those moments were fleeting, like shadows that passed quickly through my mind. They didn't linger. They didn't define me, because I had learned that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, day after day, through the good times and the bad. It's about choosing each other, even when things get hard. It's about building something real, something lasting. And as I sat on the porch one evening, watching Grace and Owen chase each other around the yard while Emily laughed beside me, I realized that I had everything I had ever wanted. I had a family, a home, and a love that was true. I wasn't defined by the pain of my past anymore. I was defined by the life I had built, the love I had found, and the future I was still creating. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. As time moved on, life fell into a rhythm that felt natural, comforting, and full of meaning. Grace and Owen grew before my eyes, and the milestones. First words, first steps, first days of school. Each felt like a new chapter in the book of my life. These were the moments I had once feared I might never experience, the life I had doubted I could ever build after the betrayal that shattered me. But with Emily, those doubts were silenced by the certainty of the life we were creating together. Parenthood brought a kind of joy I had never known existed, but it also tested me in ways I hadn't expected. There were nights when both kids were up, crying over nightmares or stubborn colds, and I was running on barely any sleep. There were days when work piled up, deadlines loomed, and coming home to the chaos of toys scattered across the floor and dinner half burned on the stove made me question if I was doing anything right. But through it all, Emily was my constant. We were a team, and together we weathered the storms. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Emily and I sat in the living room, basking in the rare quiet. She was curled up next to me on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It was in these simple, unremarkable moments that I found the most peace. There was no drama, no tension, just the quiet assurance that we had built something real, something strong. "I was thinking about what Grace said earlier," Emily murmured, her voice soft as she traced lazy patterns on my arm. I smiled, remembering how our 6-year-old had proudly announced that she was going to be a doctor astronaut when she grew up. "Yeah? You mean her ambitious career plans?" Emily laughed, the sound light and musical. "Yeah, that. She's got big dreams." "She does. And I hope we can help her make them come true." I paused, thinking about how much I wanted to give our kids everything. Not just the material things, but the love, support, and security I had sometimes lacked growing up. You know, I look at her and Owen, and I'm just in awe. We made them. We get to watch them grow and become whoever they're meant to be. Emily looked up at me, her eyes reflecting the same sense of wonder I felt. "It's pretty amazing, isn't it? This life we've built." It was more than amazing. It was everything. Everything I never thought I could have after what happened with Rachel. The scars of that betrayal had once felt so deep, so permanent, but now they were faint, almost forgotten lines on the map of my life. Emily, Grace, and Owen had filled those cracks with something far more beautiful than I ever imagined. "You know," I said, turning to face her, "I don't think I ever thought I'd get here. After Rachel, I didn't think I'd ever feel this happy, this complete. I thought I'd always be waiting for something to go wrong." Emily's hand stilled on my arm, and she looked at me with a mixture of understanding and love. You've come a long way, Jason. We both have. What happened with Rachel? It was awful. But it led you here, to us. And I'm grateful for that. Her words were simple, but they resonated with a truth I had come to accept. My past with Rachel had been painful, yes, but it had also shaped me, taught me lessons I needed to learn. It had shown me what I didn't want in a relationship, and it had made me appreciate what I had now even more. If I hadn't gone through that darkness, I might never have found the light with Emily. I'm grateful too, I whispered, kissing the top of her head. More than you know. As the months turned into years, our life together continued to evolve. Grace and Owen grew into their own little people, each with their own personalities, their own quirks. Grace, ever the dreamer, always had her head in the clouds, full of big ideas and wild imaginings. Owen, on the other hand, was grounded, thoughtful, always asking questions and trying to understand the world around him. They were my joy, my pride, and every day with them felt like a gift. Emily and I also faced the challenges that came with balancing careers, parenting, and our marriage. There were times when we were both stretched thin, when work demanded more of us than we had to give, and the kids needed our attention in ways that left us exhausted. But even in those hard times, we never lost sight of each other. We made time for date nights, even if they were just quiet dinners at home after the kids were asleep. We didn't let the small moments slip away. Looking back, I realized that these were the things that had been missing in my first marriage. Rachel and I had never put in the work, never fought to keep the connection alive when life got tough. With Emily, we made a choice every day to keep choosing each other. And that was what made all the difference. There was a moment, several years after our daughter Grace had been born, when the past collided with the present in an unexpected way. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon, and we had just gotten home from one of Owen's soccer games. I was flipping through the mail, tossing aside bills and flyers, when I saw an envelope addressed to me. The handwriting was familiar, but it took me a second to place it. Then it hit me. It was Rachel's handwriting. I stared at the envelope, my heart skipping a beat. It had been years since I'd had any contact with her. After the divorce, we'd gone our separate ways. I hadn't followed her life, and as far as I knew, she hadn't followed mine. So why now? Why this? Emily noticed my hesitation and looked up from where she was helping Grace with her art project. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. I held up the envelope. "It's from Rachel." Emily's eyebrows rose, but she didn't look surprised. "What does she want?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice laced with uncertainty. "I haven't opened it yet." For a moment, I considered not opening it at all. What good could come from revisiting the past? I was happy now, at peace. I didn't need to dredge up old wounds. But something inside me, maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the desire for complete closure, pushed me to open the envelope. I carefully tore it open and unfolded the letter. It was handwritten, and the words seemed more carefully chosen than the one she had spoken the last time we'd seen each other. My eyes skimmed the lines, and as I read, I felt a strange mixture of emotions, none of which were anger. Rachel was apologizing, not just for the affair, though she acknowledged that too, but for the way she had treated me, for the manipulation, the lies, the gaslighting. She admitted that she had been selfish, immature, and afraid of losing control. She wrote about how she had been lost back then, how she had used me as a scapegoat for her own insecurities, and how she regretted not handling things differently. There was no plea for forgiveness, no request for anything. It was just an apology, plain and simple. She said she had spent years thinking about what happened between us, and while she knew nothing could undo the pain she had caused, she wanted me to know that she was truly sorry. I finished reading the letter and sat in silence for a moment, letting the words sink in. There was a time when an apology from Rachel would have meant everything to me. But now, years later, it felt like a strange echo from another life. "Are you okay?" Emily asked gently, placing a hand on my arm. I nodded slowly, folding the letter back up and placing it on the table. "Yeah, I'm okay. It's just weird." "What did she say?" I summarized the letter for Emily, and she listened quietly, her face thoughtful. When I finished, she didn't say much, just squeezed my hand and gave me a small smile. "It's good that she apologized," she said after a while. But you've already moved on. We've built something beautiful, Jason. That's what matters. I smiled at her, feeling a rush of gratitude for the life we had built together. Emily was right. Rachel's apology didn't change anything. It didn't erase the past, and it didn't undo the choices she had made. But it also didn't hold any power over me anymore. I had moved on, healed, and created a life full of love and trust. And that was what mattered. The letter from Rachel went into a drawer, not because I needed to hold on to it, but because it was part of my story, a chapter that had finally, truly, come to a close. The years that followed were filled with all the joys and challenges of raising a family. Grace and Owen grew into teenagers, with all the complexity and beauty that comes with that stage of life. Emily and I navigated parenthood together, always trying to find the balance between giving them space to grow and guiding them as they found their way. There were moments when I caught myself reflecting on how different my life had become since those early days of pain and betrayal. It was almost surreal to think about how far I had come, how much I had grown, and how deeply I had healed. The scars were still there, faint but visible, but they no longer hurt. They were simply reminders of a past that had shaped me but no longer controlled me. I had found my peace, my happiness, and my family. And through it all, I had learned the most important lesson of all, that love, real love, is built not on perfection but on trust, resilience, and the willingness to choose each other day after day. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift I had ever received. As the years passed, the life Emily and I had built together felt more solid than I ever could have imagined during those dark days after my first marriage ended. Grace and Owen flourished, and watching them grow into young adults filled me with a sense of pride I hadn't known was possible. They were thoughtful, kind, and full of potential. Grace had kept her dreamer spirit, but she channeled it into her studies, particularly in creative writing, while Owen's quiet curiosity led him towards science and engineering. Every step of their journey, every milestone, first heartbreaks, graduations, life decisions, reminded me how precious these moments were, how fleeting time could be. Emily was the backbone of our family, our home, and my heart. Together, we navigated the ups and downs of parenting two teenagers, balancing our careers, and finding time for each other in the middle of the chaos that life often brought. There were arguments. There always are, especially with teenagers, and moments when the stress of work and family life seemed overwhelming. But we always came back to each other, always made space to connect, even if it was just sitting together in silence at the end of a long day, grateful for the life we shared. As the kids moved through high school, we began to have more time to ourselves again. It was a strange transition, going from the non-stop demands of young children to the slower, more independent world of teenagers. Emily and I found new ways to fill that time. Weekend trips, trying new restaurants, or simply walking through the neighborhood together, hand in hand. We talked about what the next phase of our lives would look like once the kids went off to college. It was exciting and, in some ways, daunting. After all, for so long, we had been so focused on our children that the idea of it just being the two of us again felt like an adjustment. But as always, we faced it together, knowing that our bond was stronger than ever. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching a summer sunset, Emily brought up something that had been on both of our minds for a while. "You ever think about what we're going to do when Grace and Owen leave for school?" she asked, her voice soft as she leaned her head against my shoulder. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot lately. It's going to be strange, isn't it? The house will be so quiet." Emily laughed gently. "Too quiet, probably. I'm sure we'll miss the noise soon enough." We sat there in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun dip lower on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the yard where the kids used to play when they were younger. I could almost see them, Grace, running through the grass, her wild curls bouncing as she laughed, and Owen, always a few steps behind her, more measured but just as full of life. Those memories were etched into my heart, reminders of how far we had come as a family. "What about you?" I asked, turning to look at Emily. "What do you want to do, when it's just us again?" She smiled, her eyes sparkling in that way they always did when she was deep in thought. "I think I'd like to travel more. We've talked about seeing more of the world, right? Maybe we could finally make it to Europe, take those trips we've always said we would. I nodded, already picturing it. Yeah, I'd like that. It's been too long since we've had a real adventure. And who knows, Emily continued with that playful glint in her eye. Maybe we'll end up in some cute little village somewhere, living out our golden years in peace. I smiled, imagining us wandering through cobblestone streets, a future where it was just the two of us again, rediscovering the world and each other. The thought filled me with a sense of calm and contentment. That sounds perfect, I replied, pulling her closer as the sun dipped below the horizon. In that moment, I realized something. No matter what lay ahead, we had already built the life I had once thought impossible, a life full of love, trust, and second chances. The pain of the past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. Emily and I had created something real, something lasting. And as we sat there, watching the day turn into night, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be, with her, now and always. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below.